The sirens screamed first. High-pitched, metallic, slicing through the night like knives on glass. On the cracked pavement outside a narrow apartment building, red and blue lights spun in dizzy circles, painting the walls like a carnival of accusation. And then came the sound of steel. The snap of handcuffs locking tight around slender wrists. Jessica Hale did not flinch. Her face, framed by streetlight and camera flashes, was almost serene. To the untrained eye, she looked more annoyed than guilty, her eyes carrying the cool detachment of someone convinced the world would bend for her again. To her, it was still just paperwork, just numbers on plastic cards. It was just a name, she thought, but that name would burn her world down. The officers pushed her gently but firmly into the back of the squad car. The door slammed, muffling her smirk. Behind her, on the sidewalk, a handful of envelopes spilled from her purse. Credit card bills, thin white slips that glowed like ghosts under the strobe of police lights. The street was littered with fragments of plastic. Credit cards, snapped in half during processing, slid across the asphalt like poker chips at a rigged game. They caught the light in flashes, tiny mirrors reflecting a truth too large to ignore. Every shard whispered the same indictment. Proof. And looming over it all was the neon sign across the street. It belonged to a bank, buzzing faintly, its message frozen in corporate optimism. Identity is proof. Yes! Everything. No passerby could miss the irony. A block away, Daniel Brooks stood frozen at the steps of another bank branch. He had come to demand answers, but the universe had chosen this night to crush his denial. His arms overflowed with envelopes, thick, official letters printed with balances he never spent, accounts he never opened. He stumbled, and the envelope slipped. A storm of paper cascaded onto the sidewalk, spreading across wet concrete like snowdrifts. The camera, if this were film, would linger here. Slow-motion shots of envelopes tumbling, one by one, stamped with his name. Daniel bent down, hands trembling, staring at his own identity scattered at his feet. A name is not just letters, he whispered to himself. It's your life signed in ink. For him, the realization was not cinematic. It was suffocating. In the beginning, it looked like just a roommate dispute. What, a misunderstanding, maybe? Daniel had always been careful, always cautious, the kind of man who kept receipts folded neatly in drawers and passwords written in code. But here he was, drowning in debt that wasn't his, while the roommate he had once trusted laughed behind the tinted glass of a squad car. This wasn't just identity theft. This was betrayal at its most intimate. The theft of a name, of a signature, of credibility itself. And in America, where credit is life, what she stole was more than dollars. She stole years of trust. She stole his access to housing, to jobs, to dignity. The story would not stay small. It couldn't. Flash forward, every news camera, every microphone, every courtroom sketch would one day circle back to this night. The slow spin of red and blue, the clatter of envelopes hitting pavement, the smirk of a young woman who thought she was untouchable. Like the first match in a dry forest, it didn't look catastrophic in the moment. But everyone watching would later say the same thing. That was when it all began. Inside the squad car, Jessica leaned her head against the glass. She wasn't crying, she was calculating. To her, this was a temporary inconvenience. She had lied her way out of worse. But for Daniel, the betrayal had already dug into his bones. He replayed the memories on a loop, dinners shared, rent split, jokes whispered across the couch. How many times had she borrowed his mail key? How many times had he trusted her with errands, believing the ease of shared living was safe? The most dangerous crimes, he thought, weren't committed with weapons. They were committed with trust. This was never just about two people in one apartment. This was about the architecture of modern trust. In an era where roommates shared Wi-Fi, Netflix passwords, and sometimes even online banking logins, the lines blurred. Jessica's betrayal was a story of youth, intimacy, and power gone wrong. She didn't just steal plastic cards. She proved how fragile the scaffolding of identity really was. If your name could be stolen, what else could they take? The question was national, and soon enough, the nation would answer. The squad car pulled away, red and blue melting into the night. On the sidewalk, the papers remained, fluttering in the wind like white flags of surrender. Except Daniel would not surrender, not this time. The camera, if it lingered, would close in on the single envelope caught against his shoe. The words printed in bold black ink, account holder, Daniel Brooks. He stared down at it, his breath fogging in the cold air. No more silence, no more hesitation. The world had just turned his name into evidence. And evidence, he promised himself, would turn back into justice. Daniel Brooks was the kind of man who made lists for everything. Passwords were stored in coded phrases. Receipts filed in labeled envelopes. His apartment desk bore the neat arrangement of someone who believed order could hold chaos at bay. At 28, Daniel had carved out a quiet reputation in his company's IT department. Reliable. Careful. The one you could trust with your network passwords and not worry about leaks. He wasn't flashy, wasn't loud, but when servers crashed at midnight, it was Daniel they called. He answered every time. He carried that same reliability into his personal life. Bills paid on time. Rent never late. Credit score sparkling. For Daniel, stability wasn't just a habit, it was an armor. His father had lost everything in a fraud scheme years earlier, swindled by a friend who promised returns that never existed. Daniel had watched bankruptcy swallow the family, watched his father's dignity erode. Since then, Daniel vowed, never again. And yet, history has a cruel way of circling back. Lately, Daniel had been losing sleep. He would lie awake, staring at the ceiling fan spin, replaying the same questions. Why me? When did it start? How didn't I see it? He chalked it up to stress at first. Too much coding, too much caffeine. But somewhere deeper, he recognized the echo of his old fear. Betrayal always came dressed as friendship. Her name was Jessica Hale. 26. Blonde. Sharp-eyed. With the kind of smile that made strangers feel instantly at ease. She moved in as Daniel's roommate 2 years earlier. At first, she was a relief rent shared. Chores divided. Companionship in a city that chewed through solitude. She bartended at a trendy lounge, often coming home at odd hours, smelling of citrus and smoke. She had stories, endless stories, about customers, tips, jealous managers. On the surface, she was charm incarnate. She cooked occasionally, spaghetti nights when Daniel was buried in code. She left sticky notes on the fridge. Don't stress, I got you. Jay. She even bought candles once, lit them in the kitchen, claiming they helped reset the vibe of the apartment. To friends, she was the perfect roommate. Lively, considerate, social. But beneath that gloss, Jessica was hungry. Hungry for status, for shortcuts, for the feeling of standing taller than others without putting in the climb. Neighbors noticed the duality. One upstairs tenant, an older woman who often saw Jessica outside on smoke breaks, later recalled hearing her brag, "Why work when someone else's name works better?" It had sounded like a joke at the time. Now, in hindsight, it was prophecy. Jessica loved the theater of generosity. She would buy takeout for the apartment one night and complain about being broke the next. She'd brag about tips, then borrow money for utilities. Always balancing the image of a carefree friend with the calculation of someone keeping score. Her confidence was intoxicating. For people like Daniel, cautious, steady, her bravado seemed like freedom. But freedom at someone else's expense is just theft with better branding. The first time Daniel confronted her, it wasn't even about credit cards. It was about mail. Daniel, softly, "Jess, my name isn't your credit line." Jessica smirking, "Relax, it's just paper. They'll never know." It was said half-jokingly, as though his concern was silly, as though trust was infinite and consequences optional. But the words clung. There were signs, of course. Mail arriving with his name but sealed with odd tape. Calls that dropped when he picked up. A charge on his credit report he didn't recognize. Each time, Jessica had an answer. "Oh, that? Probably spam." Each C. Mail mix-up. Happens all the time. CHB, XPI, banks are always screwing up. She made excuses sound reasonable, even funny. And Daniel, tired and conflict-averse, let the explanations pass. He told himself trust was easier than paranoia. But trust, he would learn, was a luxury he couldn't afford. What makes roommate fraud so chilling isn't the paperwork. It's the intimacy. These weren't strangers hacking from across oceans. These were the people who saw you stumble in after midnight, who shared Wi-Fi passwords, who borrowed your Netflix login. Living together in close quarters blurred the lines. Jessica knew Daniel's routines. She knew when he'd be gone, when mail arrived, which drawer held his checkbook. She didn't need to break in. It raised the question for everyone later: if you can't trust the person across the hall, who can you trust at all? To coworkers, Daniel was steady. To friends, he was trustworthy. But alone in his room, with envelopes piling on his desk, he was unraveling. Insomnia gnawed at him. He remembered his father's hollow eyes, the way unpaid bills stacked like gravestones. Every sticky note Jessica left, "Don't stress, I got you," turned from comfort to mockery. One night, Daniel returned home early. He found Jessica at the kitchen table, mail spread out, pen in hand. Looked up, unbothered. "Jessica. Oh, hey. Just sorting bills. You're so busy I thought I'd help." The surface story was care. The subtext was control. He brushed it off. But later that night, lying awake, he remembered the pen in her hand. Black ink. His name visible on a corner of paper. Down the hall, whispers circulated. Someone mentioned Jessica's charm with men at the bar. Someone else mentioned how she always talked about finding a way out, without the grind of a 9 to 5. The old woman who had overheard her joke about using someone else's name kept it to herself. People dismissed it as bar talk. But later, when subpoenas dragged neighbors into depositions, that line became part of the narrative. Jessica had always revealed herself. People just hadn't believed her. By the time the fraud surfaced in full, the roles were already written. Daniel, the silent, meticulous man, blindsided by the very kind of betrayal he feared most. Jessica, the charming, calculating roommate who mistook trust for opportunity. Their lives, once entwined by rent checks and Netflix queues, were about to be bound by subpoenas and courtrooms. The case asked a larger question. In a society where credit scores define futures, where identity is currency, what happens when identity itself is stolen by the person across the kitchen table? This wasn't just a roommate dispute. It was a parable about power, trust, and arrogance. One man believed in proof. One woman believed in performance. And soon, the law would decide which belief survived. The call came at the worst possible moment. Daniel Brooks was standing in front of a projector screen, explaining a new network security patch to a room of 20 colleagues. His slides glowed with neat diagrams. His voice was steady, professional. For once, he felt in control. And his phone buzzed. Once, twice, a third time. The vibration rattled against the podium like a warning. He almost ignored it, but something about the persistence made him glance down. The screen showed an unknown number, but the area code, New Jersey. He frowned, excused himself with a nod, and stepped into the hallway. "Hello, this is Daniel Brooks." There was a pause. Then a polite voice. Too polite. "Mr. Brooks, are you currently applying for another credit card with our branch in Newark, New Jersey?" The words hit like ice water. "Oh, what? No, I don't even live in New Jersey." Another pause. Papers rustling on the other end. "Sir, our system flagged multiple applications in your name. We need to verify whether these are authorized." Daniel's stomach clenched. His breath quickened. Behind him, through the glass, his coworkers kept watching his slides, unaware that his life was collapsing one digit at a time. Minutes later, his phone buzzed again. This time, a different bank. "Mr. Brooks, your balance is $12,400 already. Minimum due, $1,100. The words were clinical, rehearsed. But they landed like a hammer. Daniel pressed the phone to his ear, his hand trembling. His colleagues, now on break, spilled into the hallway. Someone overheard the phrase, $12,000, and gave him a sideways look. Whispers spread. He wanted to vanish. He wanted to crawl out of his own skin. The humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was public, corrosive, impossible to contain. That evening, the mailbox was overflowing. He pulled out envelope after envelope, each thicker than the last. Glossy statements, red-stamped notices, balance transfers. The weight of paper alone told the story. Debt, mounting and merciless. He carried the stack upstairs, dropped it on the table. The sound was heavy, final, like the slam of a judge's gavel. He ripped one open. Account holder. Daniel Brooks. Balance. $7,980. Due immediately. Another. Account holder. Daniel Brooks. Balance. Number end. And another. His hands shook. He crushed one statement into a ball, tossed it aside. The paper hit the floor with a hollow thud. Nearby, his printer blinked red. LOWINK. Then, paper jam. The machine's warning light flashed like a silent alarm. Danger. Error. Proof. Jessica was on the couch when he walked in, scrolling her phone, legs folded. She looked up, feigning innocence. Rough day? Daniel's voice cracked. Did you open accounts in my name? She laughed. Actually laughed. You're paranoid. I don't even know how to do that. He held up the stack of letters, the numbers glaring like open wounds. They called me. Twice. $12,000. In my name. Jessica shrugged. Relax, it's just paper. Banks screw up all the time. Her calmness terrified him more than anger ever could. That night, Daniel sat alone at his desk. The pile of envelopes towered like a wall between him and sanity. His laptop pinged, a login attempt blocked. His account temporarily frozen. The screen glared with angry red letters. ACCOUNT, locked. The room glowed in crimson light, washing over his face like a warning flare. He whispered to the empty air. If they can steal your name, what else can they take? The words weren't just fear. They were prophecy. Identity theft had always sounded abstract, a problem for statistics and commercials. But here it was, gutting him in real time. In the digital age, your name wasn't just a label. It was currency. It was your passport to jobs, apartments, loans, dignity. Stripped of it, you were nothing but a ghost. Jessica hadn't stolen money. She had stolen the scaffolding of his entire life. And what was worse? The theft wasn't a distant hack from a faceless cybercriminal overseas. It was the woman who shared his refrigerator. The betrayal wasn't digital. It was domestic. Days blurred. Letters kept coming. Calls multiplied. Debt collectors left voicemails, polite at first, then sharper. Mr. Brooks, this is urgent. Call us immediately. Cephal. Failure to respond will result in escalation. Esc to final notice. At work, Daniel couldn't concentrate. He mistyped passwords, missed deadlines. Colleagues noticed the shadows under his eyes. And always, Jessica smiled. She kept leaving sticky notes. Don't worry, you'll figure it out. Each one felt like a blade twisting deeper. The true breaking point came a week later. Daniel was in a staff meeting, surrounded by coworkers and supervisors, when his phone buzzed again. Against his better judgment, he answered. Mr. Brooks, this is Capital Credit Collections. We've been trying to reach you. Your account is now delinquent. Amount due, $18,300. Every head in the room turned. The words echoed too loudly, spilling into the space. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. Humiliation had crossed into spectacle. That night, Daniel stared at the ceiling again. Sleep impossible. His father's ghost seemed to linger in the room, a reminder of history repeating. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tear the letters to shreds, to erase every trace of Jessica's betrayal. Instead, he sat still, whispering again, more deliberate this time. If they can steal your name, what else can they take? The words no longer sounded like fear. They sounded like the beginning of a vow. The trigger had been pulled. A call during a presentation. A mailbox full of debt. A roommate smirk. an account locked in red. The fraud was no longer hidden. It had erupted into the open, turning Daniel's quiet life into a case study for how fragile identity really was. This wasn't just Daniel's story. It was a mirror held up to society. How many roommates shared Wi-Fi passwords without thinking? How many households left mail on the counter, trusting proximity as safety? In an age where personal data equaled destiny, trust had become the easiest weapon to exploit. Jessica's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was systemic. It forced everyone watching later to ask, who holds your name in their hands right now? Daniel closed his laptop. The red glow of ACC Quant Locked faded into darkness. The camera, if there had been one, would linger on his face. Pale, exhausted, but no longer naive. The odd had begun. The reckoning would follow. At first, Daniel thought about paying. Not because he owed the money. He knew he didn't, but because silence seemed easier than confrontation. If he just chipped away at the balances, maybe the calls would stop. Maybe the humiliation would fade. If they could move on. Late at night, he stacked the bills into neat piles, color-coded by creditor, as though order could somehow absolve him. He calculated repayment schedules on scratch paper. The math was brutal, but survivable. It would cost him years of savings. It would destroy the house down payment he'd been working toward. Little, but it was possible, and possibility was tempting. One night, exhausted, Daniel grabbed the stack of bills and carried them to the kitchen trash can. He ripped open an envelope, ready to shred every statement, ready to convince himself that paying quietly was safer than fighting loudly. The paper tore in his hands. Ink blurred under his sweating fingers. He hovered over the trash can, trembling. Then he saw it. An old photograph stuck to the fridge with a weak magnet. His father, smiling stiffly, standing in front of their childhood house before bankruptcy forced the sale. Daniel froze. He remembered the humiliation, the phone calls, the shame of eviction. He remembered his father whispering at the kitchen table, "I trusted the wrong friend." Gapel Antarius E. The bills shook in Daniel's hands. Slowly, deliberately, he stopped ripping. He set the papers down, breathing hard. "Ooh, not again," he whispered. "Not this time." The next morning, he met his old friend Marcus for coffee. Marcus listened silently as Daniel poured out the story, the calls, the envelopes, Jessica's smirks. When Daniel finished, Marcus leaned back, eyes narrowed. "Look, man, if she did this to you, what about the next roommate she finds?" The question landed heavier than any bill. What about the next one? Some 19-year-old student? Trusting? Broke? Without a voice? Daniel straightened, fists tightening around his coffee cup. His voice was low but certain. "I won't pay for her lies. I'll prove them." That night, Daniel cleared his desk. He arranged the bills, not as debts but as evidence. Each envelope was a weapon now, each statement a piece of ammunition. He scribbled a sentence in the corner of his notebook, words that felt like armor sliding into place. She stole my name, but I'll make sure my proof steals her freedom." It was more than anger. It was purpose. He didn't know where to begin, but the internet offered a path. That's how he found Rachel Moore, a 32-year-old attorney specializing in consumer rights and identity theft. Her office was small, tucked above a laundromat, but her reputation carried weight. Rachel had a record of turning overlooked cases into precedents. Their first meeting was tense. Daniel arrived with a shoebox of letters, trembling slightly as he placed them on her desk. Rachel flipped through the stack, brows tightening. She tapped one page with her pen. Multiple states, forged signatures, fraudulent addresses. Classic roommate fraud. Daniel exhaled. "So I'm not crazy?" Rachel looked up, steady. "No, Daniel, you're not crazy. You're a victim. And victims have rights." He followed, unsure. "But can we win?" Rachel leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Identity theft isn't just theft. It's violence with paperwork. And we don't let violence slide." Her words cut through him like steel. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt something like hope. Over the next days, Rachel guided him through the first steps. freeze credit reports, file police reports, contact federal agencies. Each step was grueling, but with every signature, Daniel felt the shift. He was no longer just reacting. He was building a case. The insomnia didn't vanish, but it changed. Instead of staring at the ceiling in despair, he now mapped strategies in his head. Instead of fearing the phone's buzz, he began saving voicemails as evidence. From the outside, he was still the same quiet IT worker. But inside, the metamorphosis had begun. One evening, Daniel sat across from Rachel, reviewing files. She looked at him carefully. "You know this won't be easy. You'll fight. She'll lie. People might even believe her at first." "Yep." Daniel nodded slowly. "I don't care." He tapped the stack of bills, his voice calm, steady. "She stole my name, but my proof will steal her freedom." Rachel studied him, then smiled faintly. "Then let's get to work." The turning point wasn't just about Daniel. It was about what happens when silence breaks. For every victim of fraud who quietly pays, the system grows bolder. Each unchallenged theft becomes precedent, not in court, but in culture. People shrug and say, "It's just money, just paper." But Daniel's choice was different. By refusing to pay silently, he transformed the narrative. He declared that betrayal with paperwork was still betrayal, and that justice could be demanded even when the crime left no bruises. Ironically, the theft of his identity forced Daniel to build a new one. No longer the quiet man in the corner. He was now a plaintiff, a fighter, a symbol. He hadn't chosen the role, but he was ready to play it. The same caution that once made him invisible was now his strength. He documented meticulously, logged every call, saved every scrap of correspondence. His armor wasn't physical. It was proof. On his desk, the shoebox of bills remained, but it no longer looked like a coffin. It looked like an arsenal. The camera, if this were film, would linger on the photo of his father beside the box. 2 generations connected by betrayal, but only one determined to break the cycle. Daniel sat back, exhaustion in his eyes but fire in his voice. "He stole my name, but my proof will steal her freedom." And with that vow, the silent victim disappeared. In his place stood the beginning of a legal warrior. The story should have stayed small. A man, a roommate, some fraudulent accounts. But in the 21st century, nothing stays small. Not when social media catches the scent of scandal. It began with a tweet. A student journalist from the local college paper posted, "Roommate accused of opening 10+ credit cards in his name. Case pending." Roommate fraud? By morning, the hashtag was trending. By evening, it was everywhere. The explosion news outlets picked it up, first local, then national. Talk shows debated it. Podcasts turned it into a case study. Memes flooded TikTok and Instagram, some mocking, some furious. Clips of Daniel's testimony outside the courthouse, his exhausted face saying, "She stole my name," became soundbites over dramatic background music. Within days, roommate fraud wasn't just a hashtag. It was a rallying cry. On campuses across the state, roommate trust was suddenly a hot-button issue. Student unions hosted panels. Landlords were questioned about tenant security. Groups that had once only cared about Wi-Fi speeds now argued passionately about credit reports. At one university, students painted banners, "Trust K, blank check." And at another, a group taped posters across the dorm walls, "Proof, proof too." Troost. The phrase went viral, the words stark and simple, resonating across dorms, group chats, and even protest marches. Ibahole was no fool. She knew how to perform. She hired a lawyer with television experience, one who specialized in spinning narratives as much as arguing law. She also leaned into her natural talent, charisma in front of cameras. The first time a journalist caught her outside her lawyer's office, she didn't hide. "Lawyer." She smiled. "Reporter, Jessica. Did you steal his identity?" Jessica, smiling, confident. "Identity? Please." "He gave me access. That's called trust, not theft." The line aired that night and replayed for weeks. For some, it was laughable. Like, to others, it was convincing. She built her narrative online. Daniel was controlling, obsessive, a crazy ex-roommate who couldn't handle boundaries. She called herself a victim of male paranoia. She posted filtered selfies with captions like, "Never let toxic people rewrite your story." And so, lines were drawn. On one side, Daniel's supporters. They posted screenshots of debt statements, documents, timelines. They dissected Jessica's contradictions, pointing out how her explanations changed by the hour. On the other side, Jessica's defenders. They called Daniel a tech bro, who probably exaggerated. They labeled him controlling, maybe even abusive. The debate wasn't just about them anymore. It was about everyone's lived experience. People saw their own roommate conflicts reflected in the case. Old resentments resurfaced: stolen food, unpaid bills, borrowed cars. The hashtag turned into a confessional. The real turning point came from a leak. An anonymous Twitter account posted a voice message Jessica had left for a friend. Her voice was unmistakable. Smooth. Mocking. "You think banks care about you? They care about money. And I had it." The clip spread like wildfire. It was raw, incriminating, impossible to spin. Overnight, the tide shifted. TikTok users stitched the audio into their own videos. Some mocked her, mouthing the words while holding fake credit cards. Others used it as commentary on systemic greed. But the effect was clear. Jessica was no longer just a victim of trust. She was arrogance, personified. The next morning, news crews camped outside Daniel's workplace. Cameras shoved into his face as he arrived. Questions fired like bullets. "Daniel, do you feel vindicated by the leaked voicemail? Do you think Jessica should serve jail time? Are you pursuing damages beyond reimbursement?" Daniel, exhausted, muttered only, "Proof speaks louder than spin." It wasn't a long soundbite, but it landed. Jessica doubled down. She called the leak fabricated, claimed the voice was AI generated. Her lawyer nodded along, talking about deep fake technology. But the public wasn't buying it. Clips of her saying, "That's called trust, not theft," replayed next to the voicemail. They care about money, and I had it." The contradiction was impossible to ignore. Even some of her early defenders began to back away. Protests flared outside the courthouse. Students carried signs. Silence. "Isn't safe. Isn't safe. Proof is. Your name isn't free rent." One student dressed in a cardboard cutout shaped like a giant credit card. Across it, in black marker, they wrote, "Not yours." The visual went viral. Overnight, it became the thumbnail image for half the articles covering the case. The rising conflict wasn't really about Daniel and Jessica anymore. It was about a society wrestling with fragile boundaries. Roommates weren't just people sharing rent. They were guardians of each other's mail, Wi-Fi, even fragments of digital life. Trust was necessary, but in a system built on credit scores and social security numbers, trust could also be deadly. The hashtag roommate fraud exposed an uncomfortable truth. People didn't know how to protect themselves from those closest to them. The outrage wasn't just about Jessica's betrayal. It was about the mirror she held up to everyone else's vulnerability. Through it all, Daniel rarely posted online. He didn't fight hashtags with hashtags. He let Rachel, his attorney, handle statements. But one night, walking home past a wall plastered with the words, "Proof, proof, proof, truth," Daniel stopped. He touched the paper gently, the ink bleeding under rain. For a moment he smiled. A thin, tired smile. Proof was finally louder than lies. Desperate, Jessica tried one last play. She went on a live stream, tears in her eyes. She told thousands of viewers she was being targeted, bullied, silenced. She said Daniel had weaponized the legal system against her. For a moment, sympathy flickered. A few comments defended her. But then someone in the chat dropped the voicemail link again. And the comments turned, literally admitted it. HPA, trust, trust. Justice T, spin. The live stream ended abruptly. By the time the pre-trial hearings concluded, the conflict had grown too large to contain. News outlets camped outside daily. Hashtags swirled. Posters multiplied. Jessica wasn't just a roommate anymore. She was a symbol of arrogance. Daniel wasn't just a victim anymore. He was the reluctant face of a movement. The rising conflict had achieved what no law textbook could. It turned a personal fraud into a national reckoning. And as the courtroom doors loomed, both sides knew the climax would not just decide their fates. It would decide which mattered more in America's spin or proof. The courthouse was alive before dawn. Satellite vans lined the block, wires sneaking across sidewalks. Reporters rehearsed live shots under the gray morning sky. Protesters held signs. Prove. Truth. Truced. Your name isn't free rent. Their voices echoing against marble columns. By the time Daniel Brooks arrived, the cameras were already in place. Flashes assaulted him as he walked up the stone steps, Rachel Moore at his side. He kept his eyes down, clutching the folder of evidence like a shield. Inside, the air was heavy, buzzing with whispers. Every seat was filled. Journalists, students, curious neighbors. Even the overflow room was packed. Everyone wanted to see the case that had become a national parable. True. Roommate fraud. The judge entered, robes flowing, gavel cracking once. Silence dropped like a curtain. Case of Brooks v. Hale, the clerk announced. Allegations of fraud, identity theft, and damages exceeding $50,000. Oh. Daniel exhaled slowly. This was it. Rachel rose first, calm but commanding. She gestured toward the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about proof. Not rumor, not spin, proof. Because silence doesn't keep you safe. Proof does. Her voice lingered in the air like an oath. The prosecution began with documents. Bank statements filled the screen, projected large for everyone to see. Each bore Daniel's name, each dripping with debt. Then came video footage. Jessica entering a branch in New Jersey, smiling at the teller, paperwork in hand. Next, the handwriting expert testified. Side-by-side comparisons revealed the shaky forgery of Daniel's signature against the neat precision of his real one. The jurors leaned forward. The story was writing itself. Then Rachel delivered her visual strike. She lifted a clear Ziploc bag and placed it on the evidence table with deliberate force. Inside, a fan of credit cards glistened under fluorescent lights. Exhibit 47. Every one of these accounts was opened under Mr. Brooks's name. Every one used by Mrs. Hale. The sight landed like a hammer. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing the image that would splash across headlines by nightfall. Jessica shifted in her seat, jaw tightening. When it was her turn, Jessica strode to the stand in a black blazer, hair tied tight. Her lawyer's questions were soft, rehearsed. Jessica, did you ever intend to harm Daniel Brooks? She shook her head, voice smooth. No. He gave me his mail. He trusted me. I thought, maybe, he was helping me. He didn't stop me. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Rachel rose for cross-examination, pacing slowly. So you admit you opened accounts in his name? Jessica's smile faltered. I admit he allowed me access. That's called trust, not theft. Laughter bubbled in the back of the courtroom. The judge banged the gavel for silence. Rachel pressed. Trust, Ms. Hale, does not equal consent to fraud. As Rachel's questions sharpened, Jessica grew restless. She rolled her eyes, tapped her nails against the stand. Finally, cornered by a series of contradictions, she snapped. I didn't steal. I upgraded his boring life. Gasps filled the room. A reporter's pen froze mid-scratch. One juror's mouth literally fell open. Rachel tilted her head, seizing the moment. Upgraded his life? By burying him in debt. Jessica smirked, as if daring the room to disagree. Cameras captured it. The image destined for tomorrow's front pages. But arrogance doesn't stop at one mistake. Minutes later, under further pressure, Jessica made the slip that sealed her fate. Rachel, so you never used his name? Jessica snapping. Of course I used his name. He was too weak to use it himself. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Silence gripped the room. Even the judge's gavel paused, as though stunned. Daniel sat frozen, breath shallow. For weeks he had dreamed of this moment, not vengeance, but clarity. And now it had come, not from his mouth, but hers. In that instant, the trial wasn't just about fraud. It was about arrogance. Jessica hadn't been undone by Daniel's testimony. She hadn't been trapped by Rachel's arguments alone. She had destroyed herself with her own pride. The courtroom reflected a deeper truth. Systems of power often collapse not when opponents shout the loudest, but when arrogance shouts itself into ruin. Rachel stood once more, her voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it yourselves." She stole his name. She called it an upgrade. "Oida," she mocked his caution. "This is not just theft. It's violence with paperwork. And if unchecked, it could happen to any of you. Silence won't protect you. Only proof will. Today, you hold the proof." The jury listened, faces solemn, pens scratching notes. Jessica's lawyer tried to recover, painting her as misunderstood, painting Daniel as controlling. But the words rang hollow after her confession. When Daniel finally took the stand, his testimony was brief. He didn't try to match Rachel's eloquence or Jessica's theatrics. He held up one envelope, the ink bold against the page. "This is my name. I didn't write it. But I live with the consequences." He let the silence stretch, then added softly, "She stole my name. But my proof will steal her freedom." It wasn't just testimony. It was a vow fulfilled. As the trial wound down, tension coiled tighter each day. Reporters camped outside 24 hours. Protesters chanted until their voices broke. The hashtag #ProofNotTrust surged again, plastered across banners and screens. Inside, the jury deliberated, their faces grave. Daniel sat at the plaintiff's table, staring at the Ziploc bag of credit cards, now dulled under courtroom lights. Each card was a scar, but together they formed an arsenal. He glanced at Rachel. It gave the faintest nod. Whatever the verdict, the truth was already visible. Jessica had confessed in her own arrogance. The world had heard. The judge banged the gavel. "We will reconvene tomorrow for the verdict." The room erupted, reporters shouting, cameras flashing. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply breathed, steady and quiet, as though reclaiming the space arrogance had stolen from him. Because in the end, it wasn't noise that won. It was silence. The silence that follows truth too loud to ignore. The climax wasn't a Hollywood speech or a dramatic breakdown. It was the slow, humiliating unraveling of arrogance. Jessica's own words became her undoing. "I upgraded his boring life. And then, of course I used his name." She had tried to spin lies into trust, but trust without proof is nothing, and proof, once revealed, needs no spin. The gavel struck once, and the air stilled. "On the charge of fraud," the judge declared, voice steady, "we find the defendant, Jessica Hale, guilty." Murmurs rippled through the packed courtroom. Cameras clicked, pens scratched, reporters typed furiously. The judge continued. "Given the defendant's age, lack of prior convictions, and the restitution plan, the court sentences her to 2 years of suspended jail time, probation, and full financial restitution to the plaintiff, Daniel Brooks." The gavel cracked again. This court is adjourned. For a moment, no one moved. The reporters didn't shout. The protesters didn't cheer. There was only the heavy silence that follows inevitability, when truth is no longer a question, but a fact. Daniel sat still, his hands clasped. He didn't smile, didn't pump a fist, didn't celebrate. Instead, he exhaled, a long, weary breath, as if laying down a weight carried too long. Across the aisle, Jessica stood alone. Her black dress, wrinkled from days in court, sagged at the shoulders. Her once practiced smile was gone. No cameras rushed toward her now. No microphone stretched in her direction. Even her lawyer avoided her eyes. The same crowd that once defended her online had vanished. Her arrogance, once a weapon, had become her cage. As officers moved to escort her out, she hesitated in the aisle. Behind her, through the glass doors, students pressed signs against the window. One was larger than the rest. Bold letters painted in red and black. Your name. Your proof. The image would circle the globe by nightfall. Jessica Hale, head bowed, flanked by deputies, framed by a slogan she could never reclaim. It was the symbol of her fall. Daniel rose slowly, Rachel at his side. Reporters surged toward him, but Rachel raised a hand. "No statements today," she said firmly. Daniel nodded, grateful. He didn't need to say anything. He had already said enough on the stand. She stole my name. My proof stole her freedom. Outside, the chants of students echoed. Proof tar. Trust. Proof tar harst. For the first time in months, Daniel let himself believe the nightmare was ending. By evening, the verdict dominated every platform. CNN's headline, "Roommate Found Guilty in Identity Fraud Case." A warning for a generation. The New York Times editorial, Enron, but personal, when fraud moves into your apartment. BuzzFeed's viral spin. 10. Signs your roommate might be stealing your identity. No. 7. Will shock you. The comparison to Enron stuck. Commentators called it a national reckoning on trust. They argued that while Enron exposed corporate deceit, roommate fraud exposed something far scarier: the vulnerability of everyday people, betrayed not by corporations, but by the person sitting across the kitchen table. Universities launched campaigns within weeks. Posters appeared in dorm lobbies. Protect your name. Protect your proof. Workshops taught students how to freeze credit reports, how to recognize fraud, how to safeguard mail. Landlords added clauses to leases about mail handling. Employers hosted seminars on digital identity. Even high schools began including credit awareness in life skills courses. The phrase, proof, trust, moved from hashtags to t-shirts, bumper stickers, even protest art. What had begun as a personal crisis was now a cultural shift. Meanwhile, Jessica became a ghost in the media. The woman who once posed with ease before cameras now left court with her head lowered. No one called her charismatic anymore. Articles described her as arrogant, delusional, a cautionary tale. When she tried to post on social media again, comments flooded instantly. "Where's the proof, Jess? Can't trust. Fraud. Less. Your name doesn't belong to you anymore." Her followers vanished. Her influence evaporated. She had lost more than a case. Lost her stage. Justice didn't end with the gavel. The sentence alone could never measure the damage. Months of sleepless nights, reputations scarred, years of credit rebuilding ahead. But the deeper justice lay in the shift it created. The case forced a society raised on casual trust to confront its fragility. It forced people to see that intimacy, roommates, partners, friends, could be the very breach that undid them. And yet, it also proved that silence was not the only option. That even the most personal betrayal could become a public reckoning, rewriting laws, awareness, and culture itself. Weeks later, Daniel returned to normal life, work, routines, quiet nights. But nothing felt the same. One evening, he walked past a campus wall plastered with posters. Among them, a familiar phrase: your name, your proof. A student stopped to photograph it, adjusting the angles so the slogan filled the frame. Daniel paused, watching. His name had once been a burden. Stolen, abused. Now, it was a symbol that protected others. He touched the photo of his father on his desk that night, whispering softly, "We ended it this time." In the end, Jessica's conviction wasn't remembered for the fine print of sentencing. It was remembered for what it revealed: that arrogance can weaponize trust, but proof will always outlast lies. The courtroom image of her flanked by deputies, the student signs screaming, "Why or name? Your proof." Behind her, that became the legacy. A single case, once small, had become a mirror for an entire nation. The auditorium was quiet, save for the faint hum of the projector. Rows of students filled the seats, notebooks open, phones tilted upward to record. On the screen behind him glowed two words in bold, Follow Bing, digital responsibility. Daniel Brooks adjusted the microphone. He wasn't a polished speaker. He wasn't a celebrity, but tonight, his voice carried weight beyond any courtroom. He turned, picked up a piece of chalk, and scrawled a single word across the board. Proof. Then, with deliberate care, he reached into his bag and pulled out a plastic card, cracked down the middle, edges scarred by scissors. A fake credit card. One of the many Jessica had used to impersonate him. Instead of tossing it aside, Daniel pressed it to the board with tape, right beneath the word. The room stilled. The symbol was simple but unshakable. A false card turned into a permanent lesson. This card, he said, was never real. But the damage it caused was. And the justice it helped buy? That was real too. From the front row, one student raised her phone, snapping a picture. Another leaned forward, whispering to a friend. Dozens of eyes fixed on the card, unable to look away. For them, it wasn't just a prop. It was a mirror. A reminder that something as small as a plastic rectangle could change lives, wreck reputations, and rewrite laws. Daniel noticed their stares and let the silence stretch. Silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was emphasis. Later in the seminar, Rachel Moore joined him on stage. Her presence drew murmurs. Students recognized her as the attorney whose words had punctured national headlines. She took the microphone and spoke plainly. Negligence in trust isn't harmless. It's injustice waiting to happen. Her words landed heavy, not as theory but as testimony. When it was his turn again, Daniel's voice softened. Power with no honor, he said, is just noise. Let loud, even when you whisper. The phrase was already familiar, clipped from court transcripts, spread across social media. But hearing it now, face to face, made it more than a slogan. Like, it became a challenge. Weeks later, students entering Daniel's classroom found something new mounted near the door. Behind a glass frame hung a single destroyed credit card. On. The caption underneath read, "Galihan, proof, not trust." Every day, students stopped to look. Some pointed, some photographed, some simply stared in silence. The card became legend on campus. An artifact of betrayal turned into pedagogy. Daniel never explained it again. He didn't need to. The image spoke louder than any lecture. During one seminar, a student asked if he regretted not catching Jessica earlier, if he regretted ever trusting her. Daniel paused, then said quietly, "He sold me a lie. But today, that lie bought justice." Lies lit up instantly. Within hours, the quote spread online, clipped into TikToks, painted on posters, embedded in essays. The words carried the paradox of survival, that even deception, once exposed, could fund truth. The legacy of the case was never about prison terms or restitution. It was about transformation. One fake card became a teaching tool. One whispered vow, "Proof will steal her freedom," became a rallying cry. One quiet man became the reluctant face of a movement. Trust is fragile. Proof is eternal. Months after the trial, initiatives bloomed. Universities rolled out Protect Your Name workshops. Banks updated verification processes. Even lawmakers cited the case during hearings on consumer protection. Journalists still called it Enron, but personal. Except, unlike Enron, this scandal wasn't confined to Wall Street. It reached into kitchens, dorms, apartments, anywhere trust lived. Daniel resisted interviews now. He preferred to let the framed cards speak. He preferred chalk on boards to cameras in his face. Justice, he realized, didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered through ordinary acts. A card taped to a wall, a student scribbling notes, a stranger reconsidering what they shared with a roommate. The story didn't need fireworks. It needed memory. At the end of the seminar, Daniel looked out across the auditorium, hundreds of faces waiting. "If this story reminds you of an injustice you've seen," he said, "share it. Because silence won't keep you safe. Proof will." The words landed like a benediction. Uns rose to record. Students clapped, not with frenzy, but with conviction. And somewhere beyond the walls of the auditorium, the echoes spread, through hashtags, through conversations, through quiet choices made differently. The camera, if this were film, would linger on the board. The cracked card taped beneath the word proof, chalk dust on Daniel's hand. Students filing out, glancing back one last time. Because in the end, justice wasn't the applause, the articles, or even the verdict. It was a single lie, turned into a single truth, taped forever where the next generation could see it.